In today's episode, I speak with somebody who has surrogate children, has run marathons, has written a book, has a gratitude diary. Stay tuned. All will be explained. Hello. Welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm great, David. It's really nice to be here speaking with you.
And like I said, I appreciate you reaching out and contacting me. It's always nice when people actually come and find me. So it's very much appreciated. And we're here to talk about your book, The Miles We Run, which I can elegantly see in the background there, which is always good.
Yes.
So where would you say, where would you start the conversation?
Well, there's lots of places we could start this conversation. We could start this conversation the point of why I wrote the book.
Let's start there and go back. Wherever you want, because there's always a beginning, isn't there, to everything?
There's always a beginning. There's numerous beginnings, actually. I don't think there's just one. Yeah. There's lots of beginnings through all our lives, right?
Absolutely. So it's just like, we may as well just jump in with one of the beginnings. And
perfect.
Which is the one then that, the reason you wrote the book?
So the Miles We Run is about my journey to motherhood through surrogacy. And after a very challenging pregnancy with our firstborn daughter, I was given the devastating news about a month after she was born that if I were to ever become pregnant again, it would be fatal. And as a result, we had to look for an alternative way to have the family that we always wanted to have. This took place over 25 years ago. So the internet wasn't what it is today. And it was very hard to get the information that we needed to embark on this alternative family path. And we stumbled upon surrogacy and potentially adoption. And we went down both those roads, but ultimately decided that surrogacy was the right route. And I journaled our entire experience throughout the 4 years that it took us to have our 3 children born through a surrogate. And at the end of that time, I knew I had a book, I knew I had a story, and I knew I had something that I believed would resonate with other individuals going through a similar experience.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the time to write a book because I was in the throes of raising 4 young children. And I knew one day I would go back and look upon those entries, and I would determine at the right time when it was feasible for me to spend the time to start writing the book. And about 5 years ago, I picked up those journals and I started reading what my life was like back almost 26 years ago, and came to the realization that I did indeed have a story and it was worth telling. At the same time that I started rereading those journals, I also decided for my 50th birthday, which was postponed about a year because of COVID, that I was going to run the New York City Marathon. And throughout my training regime for this marathon, I called upon such similar qualities that I needed to find and use during our surrogacy experience. So patience, discipline, perseverance, resilience, hope. The same things that got me across that finish line helped me achieve my family. And so I decided that not only was this story going to be about, me and my husband having our family through surrogacy, but those same qualities that helped me finish the New York City Marathon, it allowed me to weave a narrative of a literal but also a metaphorical marathon, because none of us have an easy road. All of us have dips and turns and hills and descents, and some of us have much larger mountains to scale throughout our lives. And as a result, I felt that this metaphoric marathon is universal in its experience. So I decided that not only would this book appeal to those who had been through or going through infertility, but for anybody who wanted some inspiration on finding and calling upon their own inner resilience and looking back over their path and acknowledging that they have found their inner strength through their own story, even though they're reading my narrative.
So I find that interesting because there was a couple of things. I've been fortunate enough to speak to two surrogate mothers on this podcast. I'd done separate interviews with two ladies who were both very open about their reasons for getting into surrogacy, and it always, on both occasions, it came from a place of, actually, I'm fertile and healthy, and I can give another mother a child. So I kind of, it's a perspective I understand, or at least have a little bit of insight into. And I don't have children. I've never really had a desire for children. So what I was curious is, at the beginning of that conversation, you mentioned that you had your first child and then discovered that, unfortunately, having another child isn't an option. So that must be, and I want to be clear, because as somebody that's never had a desire to have children, I kind of don't get the children thing. To do it, me,
right?
And as an outsider looking out, whenever I see people want children, it's I can't process it, because it's not for me. It's not like a pros and cons conversation. It's not like, well, do we do this or do there's a drive. It's like an inner drive that has to be met. It's like, if I don't do this, then there's no point me being alive, sort of thing. It's how I always look at people that have to have children. And that's the way I describe it, because people don't seem to be on the fence. They either have to have children, or they're like me and they're like, never wanted them.
Mm-hmm. I grew up very close with my brother and sister, and we still are today. We actually, the three of us, ran that New York City Marathon together and trained for it together. I grew up in a beautiful home, very privileged background, where family was, a huge part of our essence.
Yeah.
And when there's a 10-year age gap between my sister and I, and a 2-year gap between my brother and I'm the eldest. And when my sister Erin was born, I was 10, and it was like I was the second mom, but I could also be the sister. And just being able to hold and play with a real baby, not a doll, I couldn't wait to one day be a mom. There was never a question that it was like part of me. And not that I wanted to rush it, when the time was right, when I met the right person. And the beauty about, your story is it wasn't for you. And kudos to you for recognizing it and living your truth. And, that's what makes us all so unique.
I mean, my sister has a son and a daughter. They're probably the most important people in my life. I adore my niece and nephew. My sister's a single parent, so me and my brother kind of take care of a lot of things on that side. And I can't explain how important they are to me. But I'm always,
how lovely.
Yeah, but I've just always kind of, I'm fascinated by it because it's something that never happened to me. Because I've got male friends who obviously I've seen them over the years, and desperation isn't the right. I think this is the problem. It's hard for me to articulate because I've seen friends, male and female, over the years, where for want of a better term, the stereotype, the biological clock starts ticking, and I've seen this with men and women, friends, equally, and there's just, and this is kind of, so I'm thinking you've heard this news, but there's a part of you that's like, no, I've not done with my motherhood yet. So I have to figure out how I still can carry on to be the mother that I want to be.
That's very true. When the doctor was, a month after Hannah, our daughter's birth, we're sitting in the office and I'm diagnosed with a genetic condition called hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, HHT. It's a vascular condition. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but essentially I had a very challenging pregnancy. I went into right congestive heart failure with her at the beginning of my 8th month. I almost lost my life. She almost lost hers. We were very lucky. I had an OB who kept telling me everything was normal throughout my pregnancy, and my body was telling me everything's not normal. And I finally listened to my body and not my OB. And as a result, she was born early, but thank God she was fine. And, within that year, I regained my being as well. But when that doctor, who I adore, and she is a very significant part of my life still, I see her regularly for my HHT. When she told me that I could no longer have any more children, I didn't even hear the rest of the conversation that was going on. My husband, Kenny, was beside me. Our daughter was in the little bassinet in the middle of us. And all I started thinking about was, how am I going to find a way to have more children? I want her to have a sibling. I am not done mothering, as you indicated. This cannot be my reality. And how am I going to change it? What do I need to do? And there's a soap opera in North America called Days of Our Lives. Yeah. My mom used to watch it all the time. And for whatever reason, a few years prior, my mother had told me that one of the main stars, Deidre Hall, had her children via a surrogate. And in that doctor's office, I'm thinking, I had heard of this woman who had her children via another woman's body. And I was like, that is what I am going to do. I knew nothing about it, nothing. I also thought about adoption, but that road we went down that road, but we decided ultimately that it wasn't for us, as it is for many. And I think that is the most wonderful thing ever as well. I just, I knew that I was going to find a way to have more children. I just didn't know the how, but I was absolutely devastated. And as you indicated, when you want something so badly, it's almost like desperation does take over. And the only thing you see is the finish line of what you want waiting at the end. And, I speak to this in the miles we run, that for the first 2 years of our surrogacy experience, I just listened to the doctors and the social workers. I didn't ask questions. I wasn't curious. I really wasn't my own advocate. I wasn't educated. And when it wasn't working, and we had a very challenging time, we worked with numerous surrogates. I just couldn't understand why it wasn't working. And finally, I gave myself a hard look in the mirror and I said, you need to start advocating for yourself. You need to pull up your socks and you need to start educating yourself on embryology, on egg quality, on what the difference is between a live pregnancy rate versus a live birth rate. There was so much I didn't know. And once I started advocating for myself, some of the doctors we worked with didn't like that, but it didn't matter. And it was time to make a pivot. So that's exactly what we did.
It's good. I like the way you term that, advocating for yourself, because there are situations in life in general when you do have to listen to people, but there comes a time where you have to ask questions as well for your own benefit, to sort of step up and say, well, hang on a second, I am listening, but it's not all sitting right, and I think there's alternatives for this. And I from the two ladies that I spoke to who were surrogate mothers, I just think it's one of the most beautiful things that I've had the opportunity to discuss, and largely because one of the things I talked about with them was there's a stereotype that came about from Hollywood from the 70s and 80s, and it just couldn't be so further from the truth. It was always some negative kind of drug addict, raped young girl and paid off by some wealthy family. And everybody that I've had the conversations with, it's just one of the most loving experiences between people helping each other. It's just the complete opposite of all of the stereotypes.
Right. I think the stereotype now more from Hollywood is that celebrities, you know, for whatever reason, or other people who, you know, work with surrogates, they don't want to put on the body weight, you know, to each his own. You know, until you walk in somebody else's shoes, you have no idea. And it's not for us to judge. So, you know, for us, the surrogate that ended up carrying, because the same surrogate carried our three sons. We had one in 2003, and then we had twins in 2004. She was such a wonderful woman. And I will never forget her kindness or her service. Without her, I wouldn't have, you know, three of my children. And the first two carriers we worked with where it didn't work, they were wonderful women as well. And it was a very hard, challenging time. And it's unfortunate it didn't work, but you know, I guess it wasn't the right time.
Yeah.
And, you know, I can't look back and wish that it had been different, because I don't, not even in the slightest. Our path was our path for the reason it was.
But I just, like I said, it's going to sound a bit repetitive. I just like the fact that when you dig into it, the stories are positive. It's not the Hollywood stereotype. It's my experience of talking to people that have gone through it is the complete opposite. It's genuinely about people building a family. And
listen, infertility affects 1 in 6 couples. 1 in 6 couples. And that's including alternative types of families. And it's staggering. 1 in 6. So it's so pervasive, and it's the thing that drove me throughout our entire surrogacy experience was exactly as you said, hope.
Yeah.
And all women, men going through infertility, there is this underlying hope that they will have a child. And the hope is what perpetuates and helps push you forward. Because if you weren't hopeful, how do you move? How do you get up? How do you acknowledge what's going on with and in your life in this regard?
So talking with hope, how did you go from surrogacy to starting the marathon?
So totally different experiences. Surrogacy, as I indicated, was about 20 years prior to the marathon. The marathon had nothing to do with surrogacy. I've been, actively fit my whole life. I'm a runner. And I wanted to mark my 50th birthday with the New York Marathon, because if I was going to run a marathon, that was going to be it. And what I found while I was training, I started a 9-month training regimen, was that after essentially 13 miles, things start to get hard. And I was pulling on the same qualities, as I mentioned when we first started speaking, that I had to find inside of myself through our surrogacy journey. I had to be disciplined. There's a very big part of infertility that has to do with waiting. And there's a huge weight that's affiliated and associated with waiting. So you have to have patience. And when you're training for a marathon, you have to be patient. You have to be patient with your body. Some days you have great runs, other days you don't. Some days your knee hurts, some days it doesn't. And some days you got to say, you know what, I'm not going to hit that 15, 16 mile mark because my left knee is too sore. So I'm not going to achieve where I wanted to be at this point in my training. And perseverance, pushing through, getting up at the crack of dawn every day to make sure that you're keeping up with your training regimen was so similar to me, and just persevering through all the failures. We went through 9 in vitro fertilization attempts. That's fresh and frozen cycles. I don't necessarily need to get into the weeds with you, but that's a lot.
Yeah.
And we worked with 2 carriers here in Canada. We worked with another carrier that after a year of back and forth, it turned out that they weren't very honest with us. Checks and balances are much different today than they were back then. And then it finally led us to the woman who carried our babies for us. But significant waiting, finding the discipline in that wait, finding the perseverance to push through, finding that resilience within yourself to allow yourself to be strong, and to recognize that, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. All these things played a role in surrogacy and in training for the marathon. So I felt it weaved beautifully into our surrogacy story. And that's exactly what I did. And you don't have to be a runner to appreciate how much symbolism there is in running and to living life in general.
How so?
Just the different mile markers you hit when you run, and the different mile markers you hit in life. Meeting a mate, buying a house, getting married, having a child, landing that first job, getting promoted, buying your first car. These are all life markers. Hitting 6 miles, hitting 3 or I'm not sure, 10K.
Yeah, you can do miles.
It's kilometers in England.
It depends. I'm old enough to do miles, so.
Okay. Yeah. I never know. So
nor do I, and I live here.
Okay, so you get the gist, though.
Yeah, because it's a good point, isn't it? Because the more you run, the more miles you clock up over the years. But it's like life. You only get out of it what you turn up for. And
absolutely,
if you don't turn up for the training every day, like training doesn't care, like you said, if your knee hurts, it doesn't care if it's raining, it doesn't care if it's sunny. But if you want that end result, like with anything in life, you have to put in what you want from it.
It's very true. You do. You have to work hard. This whole surrogacy experience, and going through infertility definitely altered the way my husband and I parent our children. I don't know if it was because it was so hard. I do believe that plays a role. or that the gratitude that I feel every single day, not a day that goes by. And I'm not suggesting that other parents who didn't have a challenging time having children aren't grateful. I know they must be. But I can only speak to me that, raising children, young children, 4 children under 6, it can get really messy and it can get really hard. But it didn't matter to me because I was always so grateful because I worked so hard to achieve the family that my husband and I built. And even through the messy, I found gratitude, and that really shifted and changed the way we parent.
How do you express your gratitude?
That's a great question. That's a loaded question too. I write in a gratitude journal every evening, 5 things. Doesn't have to be, I'm obviously grateful for my health and my family, and I'm grateful for this discussion today. Yeah. I'm grateful for this great cup of coffee that I made this morning. I'm grateful for my workout today and being able to move my body. I acknowledge what I'm grateful for in my grateful journal. 5 points every day.
See, there's something I notice with people from Canada, USA, and so I'm going to put it kind of that continent of North America versus the British. British people and myself, we can have a gratitude journal, but I always get a sense when I'm talking to like everybody across that big pond, you genuinely can get into that place of feeling, I'm really lucky today, I'm really fortunate. Do you know what I mean? This happened to me today, and that was a great thing. Whereas in the UK, you could win the national lottery, and you would say, bloke, the guy last week won more.
Wow.
Do you know what I mean?
I'd be really happy to win a lottery, that's for sure.
We kind of really, as a race of people, we really struggle to feel absolute gratitude in a way that when I'm communicating with people like yourself, and I only ever notice this when I'm dealing with people from the USA and like Canada, so like that North America. I'm trying to make sure I don't upset all the people that get easily triggered. That
right, okay.
It's just like you guys can really just sit there and take a moment and really seriously, like take a moment and say, okay, what's gone well for me today. And then actually sit there and express that gratitude as a feeling. Say, yeah, no, I'm blessed because this little thing. It could be somebody just said, hey, good morning, you're looking good today. And you'd be like, do you know, that made me feel good this morning when I was getting a cup of coffee. Thank you, thank you to that person because I really appreciated it. And we can't do that. We're just like, yeah.
David, you should try it.
No, but I've tried.
You should break the mold.
We do try, but it's just like you guys do it with a real ebb and flow. It's like breathing.
Right.
Whereas we're like, okay, this feels like pushing water uphill again today. I'm trying to be grateful for this opportunity that I've had. It's being the best. I've just discovered my health is great. This is brilliant. I've just had a pay rise. Yeah. Okay. So what's going to go wrong? And we just kind of have this natural inclination to just, okay, something's going to get us. Whereas, and I genuinely, in the nicest way, I'm envious of it because you guys have this ebb and flow where it's like breathing. It's just like it's going out and accepting sunshine. Right.
Don't think that we also don't think things are going well. When's the other shoe going to drop? Like there are lots of moments of that too. I can only speak to myself.
Of course. But it's just whenever I hear you guys talk about gratitude, the same way whenever I hear you guys talk about faith, whenever I hear people talk about Christianity, completely different. I've had a bishop from England on the podcast. The way that Americans, Canadians talk about their faith and Christianity and their relationship with Jesus, completely different to the bishop.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like
Interesting.
it's you guys feel something, but it's not just it's the fact you can express it. Do you know what I mean? The UK is like a constant melancholy. We're just always that little bit cynical, that little bit, which is why our humour is so dark. Because it.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? You know, because we would make a we would make a joke that if somebody died, could have been worse. They could have died on a Sunday. Do you know?
Right. I hear you.
Yeah. So we have a kind of dark sense of humour about things like that, where they're just so other countries can be
I don't know, gratitude. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. No. I listen. Yes, I can only speak to Canadians because that's where I live.
Yeah.
And I do feel that Canadians, we're a very grateful, for the most part, society and country. And for me, for one, gratitude is a daily practice, not just in my journal, but in how I relate to my kids and how I relate to my husband. I am very aware of the blessings in my life, and I live with that awareness.
Yeah, you guys do it so well.
For granted.
So well. You really do. We need more of it in the UK. We need a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Not too much. We don't want to get overexcited about it, but we could do with a bit more. But so I went off on a bit of a tangent then, because like I said, it's a subject that fascinates me, because I actually do think that people who are able to just take time out and just breathe for 5 minutes, whatever it is, and just actually, how's my day really gone? I think you do just generally have a better life.
I think that's really important. I think that's a learned behavior, though. I think most of us have a tendency to be very busy all the time.
Yeah.
And even myself, I've been very busy for the past 25 years. So busy with my family, with my career, so busy that I have finally, even though I'm very busy still, I allow myself time for myself now, and I don't feel bad about it. I've set up boundaries for myself. And even though that may inconvenience other people, I'm okay, because I'm thinking of myself and what I need for my wellness, physical and mental.
How did you learn to do that? Because that's an important skill.
I think I'm still learning how to do it. But I wasn't putting my best foot forward because I wasn't taking time for myself. And then I found that resentment was seeping in because I wasn't able to achieve what I wanted to achieve for myself. And once I allowed myself to change my hours of work a little bit and be okay if I wanted to have a half an hour nap in the afternoon and not feel guilty about it because my body was telling me I needed to have a little bit of a break. Mm-hmm. It helped me recognize that, firstly, it's important to listen to your body, but secondly, you have to carve out time for yourself. You have to think about yourself. I'm a doer. I'm a people pleaser. I want to make sure that my family is happy and healthy, and I'll do whatever it takes. With my friendships as well, but I can't leave myself behind in the doing of all of that. I also have to think of myself, and that's just something that I don't know if it's come with age. I guess it has, but I'm more okay with.
Because it is something that I just think as a species, people, again, it's one of those things like the gratitude. I notice people that can say, hang on, self-preservation is more important than pleasing that person. I'm unhappy in this situation, so I need to preserve myself. And again, it's one of those things whenever I've witnessed people who are able to do that well, again, they seem to be happier. It's these little things in life that seem to make massive differences.
I agree with that. Like I said, I lived a very blessed life. I feel that I am responsible for that, and I need to take care of that. And I'm responsible for making sure that I continue to be grateful and take care of myself in that as well.
When you started writing the book, did anything sort of come out and surprise you?
Everything came out to surprise me. When I started reading those journals, it was a very cathartic experience for me. It had happened, 20 years earlier, and I couldn't believe that I was reading about my own life, because when I put those journals away, I didn't want to look back. I just wanted to move forward with my 4 beautiful children and my husband. And I think I had suffered enough heartache to last me a lifetime. So I just wanted to move forward and not look back. So when those journals started recalling memories of, miscarriages and challenging decisions and everything that I really had that had not been in the forefront of my brain, I started to process that I had never really acknowledged or dealt with what we had been through.
Yeah.
And cathartic in the way that it allowed me to almost grieve for my loss of not being able to carry any more children, and grieve, at the same time be proud of the experience that brought me to my children.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
No, it does, because I was just wondering if there was a point where you look back at that and felt really proud of everything you'd achieved, because there's a point where the vulnerability and pain of what you were going, that you're rereading, because we kind of, there's this thing with life that when you're in the middle of something, you're not often aware of what the toll might be, because you're in the middle of it and you're just trying to cope with, well, I need to get through the next hour, and then eventually if I can make it to get into bed, I need to cope with getting up tomorrow morning, because life can kick us a bit like that. And because you journaled and have kind of an honest reflection of how you were feeling about it at the time, to read that when you've kind of, for want of a better term, sailed through the storm, you've passed the light at the end of the tunnel, and you've looked back and you're like, very proud of everything you've already achieved, but then you're like, wow, but it came from this place, and that was a really painful, vulnerable place.
Right. I think I recognized how vulnerability is strength, not a weakness.
Yeah.
And I've had different occurrences in my life that brought that to my attention and to my belief. But writing this book really helped solidify my deep-rooted belief of how vulnerability is strength. And the miles we run, I lay it all out there. It is an exceptionally vulnerable story. It's, it's a wonderful narrative. It's very raw, and I hold nothing back. And I'm not ashamed. I'm proud. And I hope the book and the feedback that I've already received to date, it's newly published, has just been overwhelming. And I'm so happy that, most people won't necessarily go through infertility or surrogacy even. A lot of people experience infertility, but most people will not work with the surrogate to have their children. Most people will not run a literal marathon, but they will find their inner strength through my narrative, because it will force them to reflect on their own personal stories when they've had to recall and find that determination and that resilience within themselves. And, the miles we run, again, although my narrative, it almost holds up a mirror to the reader, to have them look deep within themselves to find and acknowledge the times that they've been, hit hard or down or scaling a mountain, that they really had to use those inner reserves to get to where they needed to go.
If you could, so imagining if you were able to, like a particular day back then when you're like, how the hell am I ever going to get through this day because of the news I've heard? But there's you today who's written this book, run the New York Marathon, raised 4 fantastic kids, have an amazing husband. What do you think, if you were able to sort of walk into a room for 30 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever it is, see that version of yourself, what would she need to hear from you?
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And you just need to believe that.
It's going to happen.
And it's going to happen. Yeah. There were many times, my husband, I don't even know how many times he said that to me in the course of 4 years. There were a lot of significant lows that, I wouldn't wish on anybody. And really tough decisions needed to be made. And working with a surrogate who wasn't honest about their background, and we lost almost an entire year of the journey to that, waiting for somebody to have turned out to had deceived us and couldn't move forward with the process. So many battles lost, but in the end, I'd do it all over again.
What do you think she would say to you?
That version of myself in the waiting?
That version of yourself on their worst day who reads the book and like, oh, bugger, that's me. What would she say to you?
Courage over comfort.
That's a nice motto. That's a good motto. So, going back to the book again, what prompted you to actually start writing it?
After I read the journals, I've always loved to write. I never really fashioned myself a writer, but I started writing this. I started taking some of my entries. The book is it's a narrative. However, I've also kept many of my journal entries, mildly edited, but the tone remains the same. Yeah. I worked with an unbelievable editor who just helped me fine-tune the story, and I was very blessed to have worked with her. She's worked with some amazing authors, and I felt that I had something to share. I felt that I had something to share, and I thought that if I didn't, I would be doing a disservice.
But what made you
Not
actually...
that I feel the...
So what I was going to ask is, what made you actually sit down and start? Because lots of people will be listening and they're like, yeah, I want to write a book. I want to write a book. I want to write a book. And the thing that I've explained to people having written my own book as well is the bit that people don't understand is you just have to start writing.
Right.
And it sounds
that's very true.
It sounds so simple, and that's the problem. It sounds so simple, and it's the hardest thing in the world to do.
What I actually did was I started transcribing my journals because I didn't want them to just be in the book. If, God forbid, something happened that I were to lose those, I would have been devastated.
Yes.
So if, anyhow, so I transcribed them after reading them. And while I was transcribing them, the story started to evolve for me. So I started to pull different excerpts from my journal, and rather than have them as part of an excerpt, I started telling the story from the excerpt. And that's how I started writing.
And what was the discipline did you sit down every day? Was it every couple of days, couple of times a week?
Every day. It actually, once I finished transcribing, that was very monotonous, because I had already read the journals, and I had to to the computer. So once I finished transcribing everything, we're talking about 3 full journals. So, and they were all handwritten. So that took me a long time to get done. Every day I was at my computer. I just loved it. I loved it. I loved the process. I loved, taking different analogies and inserting them, and then finding the narrative and finding the proper excerpt, and then the whole marathon and how this relates to running, because and then all the lessons learned. I speak to that, in the book, all the lessons learned along the way. And there were so many.
And how did it feel when you completed that marathon?
It was a wonderful process.
Yeah. How did it feel when you completed that marathon?
Oh my God, it was so euphoric. It was just wonderful. It was such a humid day in New York. It was in November. They moved the marathon in New York to November because it was too hot in October when they used to have it. So the hope was that in November you wouldn't have the heat, but it was in 2022, it was an unseasonably hot day. Like, the humidex was super high. My start time wasn't till 11, so I was running in the throes like midday. My time was off. The marathon itself was fabulous, but it didn't go according exactly to my plan. I don't think it went to anybody's plan because it was so hot. You had to change the way you were going to achieve it, because it was just too hot to go at the pace I wanted to. And that was okay. Like, race day is race day. You never know what you're going to get. So you have to be ready to pivot and change. And that's with any type of race. And that's with life itself, actually, also, because, another comparison. But crossing that finish line in Central Park was one of the most proudest moments of my life, for sure. It was just wonderful, wonderful feeling. And the energy for the New York Marathon is unlike anything I've ever seen. Like, every borough has thousands of people in the streets, and bands and singers. And it's a citywide experience. And it was fabulous. I highly recommend anybody thinking of running a marathon. New York is definitely it.
If somebody is thinking of learning to run a marathon, what would you suggest they start with? Like, how would you suggest they start their training?
Just start.
Just start. Just start running.
Just start.
Yeah.
1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers. Slowly build. Don't put pressure on yourself. Think about how far out the race is going to be, and give yourself, if you're a runner already, you'll know, how much time you're going to need to prep for it. But if you're not a runner and this is something that you want to achieve, start with smaller runs. Start with a 5K, then do a 10K, then maybe a half marathon, and then see how it goes. A full marathon is no easy feat.
Yeah,
I have to say, it's a really challenging experience on your body. It's not less than 1% of the population will run a marathon.
Yeah, I've had a couple of friends that have done marathons, and they've always said to me that if you're not a runner, they said you should really give yourself about 18 months of training before you.
That sounds about right.
Yeah,
that sounds that maybe that's might be a little bit much. It depends how old they are. It depends if they have any injuries.
I think they were doing it from the point of view of if you don't run and you need to get yourself towards, but your ambition is a marathon. I think that their concept was 18 months will give you plenty of time to not, because they said like one of the biggest things that stops everybody is they try to do too much too soon instead of letting their body make those adjustments. Like, when you build up to a mile, say, like they would say like just run a mile for 4 weeks. Then after that, then try and run 2 miles for 4 weeks. And they said when you get to the big milestones, they said they said rather than try and increase your distance too quickly, you should probably try and increase the amount of times a week you run. They say because you want your body to adapt,
or your pace.
Yeah, exactly. They're saying like they say people focus on the distance and don't focus on letting their body adjust to it, because just because you push yourself to run 5 miles doesn't mean your body's happy that you did 5 miles. And they're like, and they said like it's better to spend 4 to 8 weeks running 5 miles, getting faster and stronger at that distance than now I'm going to do 8 miles because I did 5 last week. They're like, no, because
I think it's a mix. I think it's a mix of that. I think it's really important to listen to your body. And there's so many amazing training, like marathon training platforms online now that don't cost anything, that you can build your own training plan. But you know what? If you've never run before and saying, I'm going to run a marathon, all the power to you. But start with a smaller race. See if you even like running. Yeah. Because sometimes, you get out there and it's a learned like. It's not necessarily an innate like. So a lot of people start running and are like, this isn't for me, but I still want to pursue it. I still want to push. Running for me is a love-hate relationship. I know I love it, but sometimes I hate it while I'm doing it. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to stop. I'm just going to recognize that right now I'm hating it, but I know that I really love it. And I think about how I feel when I'm done. And that's what keeps me going. So it's again, it's a wonderful goal. I think it's a great achievement, but start small.
Yeah. Last question, completely unrelated to anything. If you did have a time machine, and that time machine has to be a car, what car would it be? Where would you go in time? And what would be playing on the radio?
Oh my goodness. I'm so bad with cars.
It could be any car.
Any car.
It could be the car you've got on the driveway.
Right. My dad has a really old Corvette, like a 67.
Oh, nice.
So I think I'll take that.
Proper.
And I think it's a 67. I don't even know. He'll listen to this podcast and he'll be like, Alison. A 67. It's red with like white side like wings.
The thing is, it's a bloody good choice.
It is. It's a good choice. It's a good choice.
I gave you the option of the driveway. What's on the driveway? You're like, no. I'm going to pay homage to my dad's Corvette, and that's the right thing to do.
Right. Yes. And in terms of the radio, does it have to be applicable? Can it be any song?
And any music you want. What do you want to hear?
Okay. So Springsteen is definitely on the radio, and it can be any song. Let's choose Glory Days.
Okay.
Or The River. And if I'm going back in time, oh God, I think I would like to go back to the 1920s or the 1950s.
Yeah.
So 1920s, before, when everything just seemed okay. And then the 1950s, also when my parents were growing up after World War II, just to see what that was like.
I think they were probably the best times.
I don't think I can pick one.
I think the 20s, the 50s and the 80s were probably the best times in
right.
in that.
Well, I lived through the 80s, so
Yeah.
I know what they were like very well.
I think the 80s was amazing. I think it's
the 80s was great decade. Great decade.
Alison, that's been brilliant. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, David. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
You're welcome. And there you have it. And it's interesting. I don't know always what to make of these things, but there is definitely something about the way we perceive the world around us and how it's happening to us. Pay attention to it sometimes. You never know. But I hope you enjoyed the episode. I really enjoyed it. Please do check out the links to the book and to the website. And as always, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for the support. Wherever you are from, whatever you believe, please do take care and be blessed. Thank you.